When you think of Augusta National, you think of perfection. It is a fortress of exclusivity and control, the home of the master since 1934, and a place where not a single pine needle is out of place. It is so exclusive that it routinely hosts US presidents. Dwight D. Eisenhower played here 29 times and even had a cabin on Bobby Jones' hallowed grounds named after him. But for 2 hours on an October afternoon in 1983, the most secure golf club on earth was breached. An unemployed, heavily armed pipe fitter rammed his truck through the locked gates. He marched a hostage into the pro shop at gunpoint, cornered top White House aides, and issued a single terrifying demand. He wanted to speak to the man playing the 16th hole. That man was Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States. This is the true story of a hostage crisis on golf's holiest grounds.
And the craziest part, you probably never heard of it, because the events of the next 48 hours would bury this story forever.
To understand how a disaster like this happened, you have to understand exactly what kind of year 1983 had been for Ronald Reagan. It was brutal. The president has spent the year navigating the Cold War, dealing with the deadly bombing of the US Embassy in Beirut, the Soviet attack on a Korean airliner, and massive internal cabinet controversies. He desperately needed a break. So, Secretary of State George Shultz, who was a member at Augusta National, invited the President and First Lady Nancy Reagan down for a quiet, unpublicized weekend trip. They arrived with a massive entourage. Treasury Secretary Ronald Reagan, New Jersey banker Nicholas Brady, and an army of White House aides all stayed on the grounds, settling into the famous Eisenhower cottage. On Saturday, October 22nd, they hit the course. A group of White House officials teed off first, followed by Secretary Shultz and the President.
Among the aides playing ahead of the president was a 30-year-old advanceman named Lanny Wiles, whose entire job was to make sure presidential trips went smoothly. But the round was low. Wiles' playing partner, National Security Advisor Bud McFarlane, kept getting called away to a secure phone to discuss the impending US invasion of Grenada. Exhausted by the waiting, Wiles eventually ditched the group, watched President dump 2 balls into Race Creek on the 12th hole, and then hopped in a golf cart with another aide, David Fisher, to go buy a shirt in the pro shop. That decision would put them directly in the crosshairs of a desperate man.
Earlier that morning, a 45-year-old man named Charles Harris was driving past Augusta National's Gate 3 with his sister. Harris' life was spiraling. He was an unemployed pipe fitter. His father had recently died. His wife had left him, taking their 3 kids, and he was struggling with a severe drinking problem. He was also a man who had seen his fair share of bar brawls and routinely carried a 38 caliber pistol tucked into his belt. Noticing a heavy police presence at the gate, his sister rolled down the window and asked a deputy she knew what was going on. The deputy replied, "The president's here to play golf." Keep in mind, Reagan had survived an assassination attempt just 2 years prior. Security was ironclad. The deputy famously told them, "An ant can't crawl in there." Harris went home.
Downed a few drinks and made a decision.
He believed that if he could just talk to the president face to face about foreign labor taking American jobs, he could fix his life. He loaded a bottle of tequila into his 1974 Dodge pickup, which he called All Blue, tucked his 38 into his waistband, and drove straight back to Augusta. At 2:15 p.m., he pulled up to Gate 3.
He locked the hubs into four-wheel drive, revved the engine and slammed on the gas. The truck smashed into the gate, but it held. Harris threw it in reverse, floored it again, and this time the metal gave way. All Blue went speeding onto the pristine grounds. Harry slammed the brakes near the clubhouse. A club chauffeur, Roy Sullivan, was quietly unloading a member's golf clubs. Harry walked up behind him, shoved the 38 squarely into his back, threw him into a headlock, and pushed him through the front doors of the Augusta National Pro Shop.
"Everyone in the back room," Harris yelled. Inside the shop were 6 people, including Lanny Wiles and David Fisher. the two top White House aides who had just come in to buy a shirt. Wiles turned around to see a frantic man in a red Atlanta Falcons practice jersey, suspenders, and a Dixie ball cap, waving a gun. Fisher whispered that it must be a robbery, but Wiles instantly knew better. Wiles quietly told Fisher to ditch his Secret Service radio, knowing that if the gunman saw it, he would know they were with the president. Wiles casually dropped his own radio into a bin of golf towels. Harris corralled the hostages into a back room. Then, he issued his single demand. I want to see that son of a bitch on the golf course. Knowing they needed to de-escalate the situation, Fisher volunteered to go find the president and arrange a meeting. Harris agreed, letting Fisher out, and eventually began releasing the other terrified Pro Shop employees one by one. Outside the window, black-clad commandos began dropping from helicopters. Inside, it was just Harris and the 30-year-old White House aide, Lanny Wiles. Harris didn't believe Wiles was just a random shopper. He slammed Wiles against the wall and pointed the barrel of the 38 directly between his eyes. This is the moment of truth, Harris told him. Raise your hand. Have you had a drink of liquor today? Wiles, smelling the tequila on his captor's breath, calmly looked back and said, Charlie, if you count after midnight as today, then I sure have. The tension broke. I just wanted to see if you were a drinking man, Harris replied. Meanwhile, out on the 16th hole, the Secret Service was scrambling. The phone inside the pro shop suddenly rang. Harris picked it up. It was President Ronald Reagan. The president tried to negotiate, calling at least 5 times, but Harris was furious that Reagan wouldn't meet him face to face. We ain't playing no fucking golf here today, Harris screamed, before literally ripping the phone out of the wall and throwing it across the room. Realizing negotiations were failing, the Secret Service evacuated the president. They loaded Reagan into a black limousine, flanked by an open convertible packed with agents pointing Uzi submachine guns. They sped out of the club onto Washington Road, in full view of the public, and quietly snuck the president back in through another gate to hide him in the Eisenhower cabin. Back in the pro shop, Harris and Wiles turned on a TV and were watching the Tennessee-Georgia Tech football game. Suddenly, the broadcast was interrupted by breaking news footage showing Reagan's motorcade speeding away from Augusta. Harris watched his only leverage drive away on live television. Wiles, playing it cool, jokingly suggested they needed a strong drink. He convinced Harris to let him open the door to talk to the police. When the door opened, an agent screamed for Harris to give up. Harris pushed the 38 into Wiles' ribcage. Do I have to kill this boy right now? He yelled. Wiles stared him down. Do you want a drink of liquor or not? Harris pushed Wiles out the door to safety. Free at last, Wiles immediately sketched a diagram of the pro shop for the snipers. Eventually, Harris realized it was over. He put his gun down and surrendered. He told a reporter years later, if I'd wanted to kill him, I'd have driven up to him and done it. I just wanted to talk to him. When the Secret Service recovered his 38 revolver, they realized something incredible. The gun couldn't have even fired. Harris had used it to hit so many people in bar fights over the years that the trigger guard was completely bent inward, blocking the trigger. To prove agents wrong, Harris took the revolver and shot once in the direction of a window. That was the only shot taken that day. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, serving 3 before being paroled. But here is the most incredible part of the story. Why is this hostage crisis almost completely erased from the history books? That would be because of what happened the very next morning. That night, as Wiles finally poured himself a Jack Daniels at his hotel, he turned on the TV expecting to see his hostage story blanketing the news. Instead, he saw tragedy. Overnight, a suicide bomber drove a truck full of explosives into a military barracks in Beirut, killing 241 American service members. And just 2 days later, the United States invaded Grenada. The Augusta standoff was immediately swallowed by global history. The only permanent reminder of that day was a single bullet hole in the pro shop window, which remained a quiet showpiece on Augusta National tours for years to come.